extension was given, we should not be at the end of a fortnight's prolongation in exactly the same state as we are in the present time, because the miners have never budged 1 inch from their attitude as regards accepting the report.
At any rate, however many differences there may be in interpretation of what was said and what was inferred on a particular occasion, let the House look at the plain and simple facts. Is there anyone who does not believe that my right honorable friend, the Prime Minister, has desired to avert this breakdown more than any other man in the whole country? Is there anyone who can dispute the fact, as Chancellor of the Exchequer, I have a great political interest in averting this disaster as any other member of the House? Does anybody seriously hold the idea that the question of a small prolongation would have stood in the way if there had been any practical hope of settlement? We would gladly have made a sacrifice, and even if we had made a statement to the contrary, we would not have allowed that statement to stand in the way, provided we were sure there was, not a certain, but a reasonable hope of getting a permanent solution. Obviously, however, things cannot get into the position where we are committed to an indefinite prolongation of the subsidy, while a somewhat vague reorganization is going on laboriously in the coal trade as preliminary to any readjustment of economic conditions. It has been said, what does it mean? It is taxpayers' money. It is money taken from the pockets of the people of the country. It is taken from the necessities and comforts of the working classes. Agriculture, steel, iron, shipbuilding are all suffering too, and in some cases and in many parts the conditions both of hours and labors are worse in those industries than they are in the coal industry or parts of it. How can you justify the whole country being forced to pay this particular levy almost indefinitely, when there is no prospect of any solution? Anyhow, whether it is just or not that there should be a continuance of the coal subsidy to the miners and mine owners in the pressing circumstances, that is a question which Parliament and Parliament alone can competently decide. This Parliament, representing 45 million, is the only body that can judge the correlation of all the interests in the country. If that be so, if I have given a fairly accurate account of the situation, what is the position created by the decision to call a general strike? That decision is the second fact in the situation. The first fact is the demand for a continuance of the subsidy. The second is the terrible, blasting, devastating menace of a general strike throughout the country. The right honorable gentleman drew distinctions between general strikes. He said there were general strikes to force legislation, and that these were shocking and unconstitutional, but a general strike out of mere sympathy in a wages dispute apparently he regarded as legitimate. I see no difference whatsoever between a general strike to force Parliament to pass some bill which the country does not wish for, and a general strike to force Parliament to pay a subsidy. There is a great distinction between a trade dispute designed to bring about a solution as between masters and men, and a general strike of this character. We all deplore strikes, but the strike has been found almost the only way, when other means have failed, of getting to a conclusion in regard to trade disputes, and organized labor has repeatedly repulsed the idea of compulsory arbitration. We have recognized it for years as a lamentable method of adjusting disputes when everything else has failed. Suppose we have a miners' strike. As we have seen twice before, it is a process of reducing people, by cruel losses on all sides. Government, miners, and mine owners are all reduced to the same position, where after the lapse of time they come into a more reasonable frame of mind, and offer in weaknesses or in sorrow to make a settlement. That is the process, and it is the process that British labour has always claimed to have the right to exercise. But that is an entirely different thing from the concerted, deliberate, organized menace of a general strike in order to compel Parliament to do something which it would otherwise not do. A general strike is a great number of trades which have been selected, and which have been informed in a very elaborate and thorough accounts which have been given in the papers, obviously means, if it were continued for any length of time, the ruin of the country. Therefore, the country and Parliament, which represents the nation, are confronted quite simply with the choice either of being ruined or of submitting to pay very large sums of the taxpayers' money to one particular trade which they do not think justified. It is really not possible. I am not going to use one single provocative word, for after all, what is the use of provocative words on such an occasion here in the House of Commons? Probably our words may go no further than the House of Commons, but all the more should they be sincere and unprovocative. It is absolutely impossible to justify the submission by Parliament to such a demand. We know how hard the leaders opposite have tried to get the ministers to make some concession, but the miners were unable to. Time and again my colleagues inform me they were not able, their leaders, to give any practical acceptance of the Commission's report. But whether or not the miners are right really does not arise for the purpose of argument. You may think they are right, and we may think that they are not right. But anyhow, right or wrong, the position we are in tonight is that we have either got to face the ruin of the country or submit to a demand which is placed upon us under duress. Therefore, it seems that the general strike turns, not upon the decision of the Trade Union Congress, even as to whether the claims of the miners are just. It turns on the failure of the Trade Union Committee to persuade the miners to accept some modification.
Mr. Thomas, this is not a laughing time. If there is a genuine desire to find the facts, I am going to do it. The right honourable gentleman is not correct, and I had better correct him. It is true that the General Council were empowered, and I speak officially on their behalf, in saying they will accept all the responsibility. And while we were at a critical moment, a critical letter was handed to us. The Prime Minister knows we were then engaged in finding, and had already said that we believed that we could find, a formula for acceptance. That was our mutual word between us, and it was an unfortunate fact that this other incident happened that burst it up, just when we were likely to succeed. Do keep that in mind.
I am bound to say I do not share the hope that this right honourable gentleman had at that time, because I have been up against these very grim facts, that the miners are not prepared to accept any modification of their conditions at the present time. I am not blaming them a bit, but they are not, and on the other hand, we are not prepared to continue the subsidy unless we see some swift finality in that process. But in this position, when it is our view, and the view of the Parliament, that we are confronted either with acquiescing in the ruin of the country, or submitting to the dictation of one particular industry, itself the interested party in the dispute, I cannot conceive of any Parliament worthy of the name, let alone the oldest and strongest Parliament in the world, which would so completely abdicate its position, which would submit to such dictation, without making every exertion, and undertaking every expense, and running every risk, and taking every measure in its power that circumstance may require. I am told this is not a strike to starve the nation into submission, and I readily recognize the offer which has been made to convey food and necessaries by the Trade Union Committee. But what difference does it really make to the issue whether the country is immediately to be starved into submission, or whether ruin is to be brought upon it, out of which famine will emerge in a few weeks or months? There is no difference. It may have been a wise thing for the trade unions to have done, but as far as affecting the situation is concerned, it affects it in no way. And what government in the world would enter into partnership with a rival government against which it is endeavoring to defend itself and society, and allow that rival government to sit in judgment on every train that runs and on every lorry on the road? Our title deeds in this House, and after all we represent a great mass of electors, an honourable member, not the majority. We do not represent a majority, but we represent a large number than honourable members opposite. Our title deeds do not allow us to contemplate such a situation. We cannot by any means divest ourselves of the responsibility of maintaining the life of the nation in essential services and in public order, and in pursuance of that we are bound to take every measure, and even perhaps